The invitation arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. Cream colored envelope, gold embossed lettering, elegant enough to feel expensive before I even opened it. I remember standing in my kitchen holding it with wet hands after bringing in groceries from the car. For a moment, I smiled. My son was finally getting married. After everything we'd survived together after his father died, after the years I worked double shifts, after selling my jewelry to keep him in private school, after pretending not to notice when he slowly stopped calling me as often after meeting Vanessa. I still believed this wedding meant something: family, healing, a new chapter. I carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the invitation. Mr. and Mrs. Charles Whitmore request the honor of your presence. My eyes paused. Whitmore, not my son's name, Vanessa's parents. Then I saw the venue, the Belrose estate. A strange feeling passed through me. Not pain, not yet, just something quiet and unsettled deep in my chest. The Belrose estate sat on 12 acres overlooking Lake Forest, one of the oldest luxury properties in Illinois. Massive white stone mansion, black iron gates, crystal ballroom, imported gardens. People rented it for political fundraisers, celebrity weddings, and old money galas. I knew every inch of that house, every hallway, every hidden staircase, every cracked marble tile beneath the east wing window, because 32 years earlier, my husband and I bought it. But nobody knew that, not publicly, not even my son anymore, especially not Vanessa's family. After Richard died, I quietly transferred ownership into a private holding company for legal protection during a corporate lawsuit connected to his old business partners. The estate stayed under company management. The public records are buried beneath layers of legal paperwork. I never corrected anyone's assumptions after that. Most people believed the mansion belonged to old investors from New York. Even my son slowly stopped associating the property with us after the years passed. And eventually, he stopped associating himself with me too. 3 days after the invitation arrived, Daniel called. Mom, he said distractedly, there's something Vanessa wanted to discuss about the wedding logistics. Logistics. Not how are you, not are you excited. Logistics. I stirred my tea slowly. What kind of logistics? A pause. You know how Vanessa's family is. Very formal, very image conscious. I already knew where the conversation was going. I'm listening. Another pause. Longer this time. Then finally, she thinks it would be better if you entered through the catering entrance during the ceremony setup. Silence. I thought maybe I misunderstood him. The kitchen entrance? It's not like that, Mom. But it was exactly like that. They just think it'll avoid confusion with the guest seating arrangements and family photography. Family photography. I smiled softly to myself then, not because it was funny, because sometimes pain becomes so familiar it arrives quietly. And where exactly will your mother be sitting during your wedding, Daniel? Another pause. Second row. Second row. His father built that ballroom chandelier room by room. I spent 10 winters restoring the gardens beside him. I carried Daniel through those halls when he had pneumonia at age 6. Second row. And Vanessa's parents? Front row, obviously, Mom. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. There it was. The sentence older mothers hear right before their heart breaks. Don't make this harder. As if dignity is an inconvenience. I looked around my quiet kitchen, the same kitchen where Daniel used to sit, doing homework while I cooked soup after my nursing shifts. The same hands now trembling against the counter once packed his school lunches every morning for 12 years. I understand. I said calmly. And somehow that upset him more. Mom, you should focus on your wedding. You're not angry? No. Anger comes from surprise. This wasn't a surprise. This had been happening slowly for years. The canceled holidays, the unanswered calls, the little corrections about how I dressed, the way Vanessa introduced me at parties. This is Daniel's mother, Evelyn. Never. This is Evelyn. Never, she raised him alone. Never, she helped him become who he is. Just Daniel's mother. A background role. Useful. Disposable. Quiet. After the call ended, I walked into my study and opened the bottom drawer of Richard's old mahogany desk. Inside sat a dark blue leather folder. Property deeds, ownership records, tax documents, corporate filings, the Belrose estate. Legally mine. Paid in full. I stared at the papers for a long time. Then I closed the folder again. Not because I planned revenge, but because for the first time in years, I realized my son had absolutely no idea who he was humiliating. And somehow, that hurt more than the humiliation itself. The following week, wedding preparations consumed everything. Or at least, they consumed everyone except me. I wasn't included in dress fittings, not invited to tasting dinners, not asked about flowers, music, or seating arrangements. At first, I told myself not to take it personally. Young couples get overwhelmed. Modern weddings are complicated. People forget things. But forgetting someone once is different from slowly erasing them. And over the next few days, I began noticing how completely I had disappeared from my son's new life. One afternoon, I stopped by Daniel's condo carrying a garment bag. Inside was Richard's cufflink set, solid silver, hand engraved, passed from father to son for 3 generations. Daniel opened the door distractedly, phone pressed between his shoulder and ear. Yes, Marcus, just make sure the investors are seated near Vanessa's father. Investors. Everything lately sounded transactional. When he finally looked at me, his expression changed briefly. Not warmth, recognition, like someone suddenly remembering an appointment. Mom, I didn't know you were coming. I lifted the garment bag slightly. I brought your father's cufflinks. For the first time all day, something softened in his face. Oh, he stepped aside to let me enter. The condo smelled expensive. Vanessa had transformed the place completely since moving in. White marble decor, glass coffee tables, designer candles, huge abstract paintings that looked like spilled ink. Beautiful. Cold. Nothing in the apartment hinted Daniel had once belonged to ordinary people. No family photos, no childhood memories, no trace of Richard. Even the framed university graduation picture on the wall only included Vanessa and her parents, not me. Vanessa walked out from the hallway wearing silk cream loungewear and a tense smile. Evelyn, she said carefully. Not hi, not it's good to see you, just my name. The kind of greeting people use when they're trying not to stain expensive fabric. I brought Daniel something that belonged to Richard. Vanessa nodded politely, but her eyes already drifted back toward her laptop on the kitchen island. Wedding spreadsheets, guest lists, financial projections. Because somehow modern weddings now look more like corporate mergers. Daniel opened the garment bag slowly. The moment he saw the cufflinks, his expression changed. I watched his thumb brush over the tiny engraved initials. R.W. Richard Whitmore, his father. For a second, I saw my little boy again. The child who used to wait by the front window every evening for his father to come home from work. The teenager who cried silently at the funeral because he thought being the man of the house meant never showing weakness. You kept these? He asked quietly. Of course. He swallowed hard. They're beautiful. They were your father's favorite. Vanessa finally looked up from the island. Oh my god, those are vintage? The spell broke instantly. Daniel carefully placed them back into the box. You should wear them at the wedding, I said softly. Vanessa exchanged a quick glance with him. Tiny, fast, but I caught it. And suddenly, I knew. Daniel cleared his throat. Actually, Vanessa's father already bought me a set for the ceremony. Of course he did, because every role connected to love in Daniel's life had slowly been reassigned. Father figure, financial advisor, family authority, replaced. I see, I said gently. You can still keep these, Daniel added quickly. Keep these, as though I had brought him office supplies. Vanessa closed her laptop and finally approached us. We're trying to maintain a certain aesthetic for the wedding, she explained carefully. Aesthetic, not sentimental, not emotional, aesthetic. I nodded slowly. Your father never cared much about aesthetics. Daniel looked uncomfortable immediately. Vanessa smiled tightly. Well, Belrose is a very elevated venue. Belrose. The way she said it made me almost smile, as though she personally belonged to the estate now, as though old money had accepted her, as though marble walls and chandeliers could erase where people came from. I remembered the first time Richard took me there. I was 27, pregnant with Daniel, terrified. The mansion was half abandoned then. Dust sheets covered the furniture. Rain leaked through the west wing roof. The gardens were nearly dead. Richard stood in the ballroom, holding my hand, and whispered, One day this house will hold every generation after us. Not wealth, not status, family. That was the dream. And now, my own son wanted me to enter through the kitchen. Vanessa walked back toward the island. Oh, before I forget, she said casually, we'll need your final RSVP for the guest security list. Security list? The estate has private security for high profile weddings. I almost laughed. High profile. The only reason Belrose even survived financially after the recession was because Richard and I secretly refinanced half our retirement portfolio to protect it. But I simply nodded. Of course. Daniel walked me toward the door afterward. For a moment, he seemed nervous, like there was something else he wanted to say. Finally, he sighed. Mom, please try to make things easy at the wedding. Easy. Again. Have I made things difficult? No. But Vanessa's family is very sensitive about appearances. I looked at him quietly. When did appearances become more important than people? His jaw tightened slightly. You don't understand how these circles work. There it was. The sentence people use when they've started believing wealth equals worth. I studied my son carefully then. Tailored shirt, luxury watch, corporate confidence, exhausted eyes. And underneath all of it, a frightened little boy still desperate for approval, especially from people richer than him. I understand more than you think, I said softly. His expression flickered. But before he could respond, Vanessa called from inside. Daniel, the florist is on FaceTime. He looked back immediately, like a reflex, like a leash. Coming. Then he turned to me again. I'll see you Saturday, okay? Saturday, his wedding day, the day he planned to hide his own mother near the catering staff. I smiled gently. Yes, sweetheart. As I drove home that evening, rain rolled across the windshield in soft waves, and for the first time, I began wondering whether Daniel had truly forgotten who owned Belrose Estate, or whether somewhere deep inside him, he simply believed I no longer mattered enough for it to matter. The rehearsal dinner took place the night before the wedding. Private dining room, lakefront country club, crystal chandeliers glowing against dark walnut walls. Everything smelled like expensive wine and quiet judgment. I almost didn't go. Not because I was angry, because humiliation becomes exhausting after a while, especially when it arrives dressed in politeness. Still, Richard raised me to face discomfort with dignity, so I wore a navy silk dress, pinned my hair carefully, and arrived exactly 7 minutes early. Not eager, not late, controlled. The hostess checked the reservation list at the entrance. Name? Evelyn Whitmore. The girl scanned the tablet twice, then again. Her smile faltered slightly. I'm sorry. I don't seem to have you seated in the main dining room. Of course not. A younger assistant hurried over before I could answer. Oh, she whispered awkwardly. Mrs. Whitmore has been assigned to the overflow terrace seating. Overflow. I looked through the open doors toward the main room. Daniel sat beside Vanessa beneath a floral arch arrangement, while both families laughed around candlelit tables. My seat sat outside behind glass doors near the heaters. Alone. Not even at the family table. Interesting. The assistant looked embarrassed. I'm so sorry. The seating chart came directly from the bride's coordinator. The bride's coordinator. Another modern invention designed to help wealthy people outsource cruelty. It's perfectly fine, I said calmly. And strangely, it was. Because every small humiliation was removing another layer of illusion. The terrace overlooked the lake. The cold wind moved softly across the water. String lights reflected against the dark surface like scattered gold. I sat alone with my tea and watched through the windows as people celebrated inside. And for the first time, I truly saw the difference between wealth and belonging. Vanessa's parents moved through the room like royalty. Her mother wore diamonds large enough to pay college tuition. Her father shook hands constantly with investors, attorneys, surgeons, and politicians. People orbited them. Meanwhile, I sat outside like an afterthought at my own son's wedding weekend. A waiter approached gently. Would you like another tea, ma'am? Yes, thank you. At least the staff still saw me as human. About 20 minutes later, someone opened the terrace door. Daniel. Relief crossed his face when he spotted me. There you are. I smiled faintly. Apparently. He looked uncomfortable immediately. Mom, don't start tonight. Interesting. He assumed pain automatically meant conflict. I haven't started anything, sweetheart. He glanced toward the dining room nervously. Vanessa's mother had to rearrange some seating because of business associates. Business associates again. Always business. Always status. Always imagine. Never family. Daniel sat across from me for a moment, and suddenly he looked tired, not wedding stressed. My soul is tired. You okay? I asked softly. He rubbed his forehead. Honestly, no. That surprised me. For a second, his voice sounded young again. They've spent 3 days arguing over flowers, guest rankings, table hierarchy. I don't even recognize this wedding anymore. Then why allow it? His laugh came out hollow. You think I have control over any of this? Ah, there it was. The truth hiding underneath the tuxedos and champagne. My son wasn't becoming powerful. He was surrendering himself slowly to people who made him feel small, the same way I once did after Richard died. Grief makes people vulnerable to anyone promising certainty. You can still stop things before tomorrow, I said carefully. His eyes widened. Stop the wedding. No, stop abandoning yourself. Silence. For a moment, I thought he might actually hear me. Then the terrace door opened again. Vanessa. Even from across the room, Her smile looked strained. "Daniel," she said lightly, "everyone's waiting for the champagne toast." He stood immediately, instinctively, again like someone responding to command rather than love. Vanessa's eyes shifted toward me briefly, polite, controlled, cold. "There you are, Evelyn," she said. "I was worried you'd left." Interesting choice of words. Not, "I'm glad you came." Worried I'd left. Because appearances mattered. A missing mother might create questions. "I was enjoying the lake," I answered. She nodded distractedly before looking at Daniel again. "Oh, and sweetheart, tomorrow remember your mother should arrive through service entry B. Security is tightening the main gate before guests arrive. Service entry B. Not even kitchen entrance anymore. Now it sounded like loading dock instructions. Daniel looked embarrassed. "Vanessa? What?" she said quietly. "The planners already organized everything." I watched them carefully then, not with anger, with clarity. Vanessa wasn't evil. She was terrified. Terrified of social embarrassment. Terrified of losing status. Terrified someone ordinary might contaminate the polished image she spent years constructing. And Daniel feared losing her approval more than losing himself. That combination destroys families quietly. Vanessa touched his arm gently. "Come inside." He hesitated, just briefly, then followed her, and somehow that tiny hesitation hurt more than if he'd walked away immediately, because it meant somewhere deep down he knew. The rest of the dinner unfolded like a theater. Toasts, laughter, champagne glasses, stories about legacy families and new beginnings. Not once did anyone mention Richard. Not once did anyone mention the years I spent helping Daniel survive after his father died. It was as though my son had emerged fully formed from wealth itself. At one point, Vanessa's father stood to make a speech. Tall, silver-haired, perfect posture. "A marriage," he announced proudly, "is about entering the right family and building an even stronger future together." Everyone applauded. I almost smiled again, because the irony was extraordinary. The right family inside a mansion legally owned by the woman sitting alone outside. Halfway through dessert, an older man approached my terrace table. I recognized him instantly. Walter Green, Belrose Estates operations manager. He'd worked there nearly 20 years. His expression changed the second he saw me. "Mrs. Whitmore?" I placed a finger gently against my lips before he could say more. His eyes widened immediately. "Ah, smart man." "I apologize," he said carefully, adjusting himself quickly. "I didn't realize you were attending the Whitmore wedding personally." Personally, meaning he assumed ownership representatives would remain anonymous like always. "I'm only here as Daniel's mother tonight." Walter glanced through the windows toward the main ballroom. Something troubled passed across his face. "I see." He understood more than he said. Good staff always do. "I hope the accommodations have been satisfactory," he added professionally. "They've been memorable." His jaw tightened almost invisibly. Again, smart man. Before leaving, he leaned slightly closer. "If you need absolutely anything tomorrow, Mrs. Whitmore, the staff answers to you. Not Vanessa, not the planners, not the Whitmores. Me." I thanked him quietly, and for the first time since the invitation arrived, I felt something shift. Not revenge, not anger, authority. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. Inside the dining room, music rose louder as guests moved toward the dance floor. Daniel laughed at something Vanessa whispered. But even from outside, I could see the strain behind his smile. And suddenly I wondered something that stayed with me all night. When this marriage finally stripped away all the performance and status and appearances, Would my son realize too late who truly loved him? Or would pride keep him blind until everything collapsed? I woke before sunrise on the morning of the wedding, not because of excitement, because grief has its own internal clock. The house was silent except for rain tapping softly against the windows. For a long time, I simply sat at the edge of my bed staring at the pale blue dress hanging beside the closet. Richard bought me that dress 12 years earlier for our anniversary dinner. You look like peace in this color, he told me. I almost didn't wear it. Part of me thought, why bother dressing beautifully for people trying to hide you? But another part, the stronger part, refused to shrink for anyone anymore. By 8 o'clock, my hair was pinned softly at the nape of my neck. Pearl earrings, minimal makeup, simple elegance. Not because I needed approval, because dignity matters most when people are trying to take it from you. At exactly 9:15, my phone rang. Walter Green. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore." His voice sounded unusually tense. "Good morning, Walter. I apologize for disturbing you on such an important day, but I felt you should know about a conversation I overheard this morning between the wedding planners and the Whitmore family." I leaned slowly against the kitchen counter. "What kind of conversation?" A pause. Then carefully, "They're instructing staff not to mention your connection to the estate under any circumstances." Silence. Not a shock. Confirmation. Walter continued quietly. "They seem concerned that certain guests may think you're associated with ownership. Associated with ownership. Interesting phrase for the woman paying the property taxes." "And why exactly would that concern them?" I asked calmly. Another pause. Finally, "Vanessa's father has apparently been implying to investors that his family is negotiating long-term acquisition rights to Belrose." There it was, the real reason. Not embarrassment, ambition. Suddenly dozens of little moments clicked into place. The obsession with appearances, the aggressive control, the constant emphasis on status, the need to reduce me into something small and invisible, because invisible people can't interfere with powerful illusions. I walked toward the study slowly. Richard's old blue folder still sat inside the desk drawer, untouched, waiting. "Thank you for telling me, Walter. There's more." Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. At approximately 7 this morning, Vanessa's mother instructed security to deny entrance to any guest arriving through the main drive unless approved personally by the family coordinator. I almost laughed softly. The family coordinator. A woman 27 years old with a clipboard now deciding who belonged at Belrose Estate. "And my name?" I asked. Walter hesitated. "Your name was placed on the service access list." There it was again. Service entrance, kitchen access, staff pathway. My son's mother categorized beside florists and catering crews. Oddly enough, the pain no longer felt sharp, only cold, very cold. "I understand," I said quietly. "Mrs. Whitmore." Walter lowered his voice. "The staff is deeply uncomfortable with how you're being treated." That touched me more than he probably realized, because kindness from strangers often arrives exactly when family fails you. "Thank you, Walter. Please make sure the employees continue following normal operations today." "Of course." "And Walter?" "Yes, ma'am?" "Do not interfere unless I ask you to." A pause, then softly. "Yes, Mrs. Whitmore." After the call ended, I stood alone in the study for a long time. Outside, rain continued falling in thin silver lines. I opened the blue folder again. Property deed, corporate ownership documents, historical restoration permits, tax records. Every page carried my signature, mine. Not Vanessa's father, not investors, not the wedding planners, mine. Yet somehow, I had spent years allowing people to make me feel temporary inside my own life. At 10:30, my sister Carol arrived unexpectedly. She carried a garment bag and two coffees. The second she saw my face, her expression changed. What happened? I hesitated, then told her everything: the kitchen entrance, the rehearsal dinner seating, the security instructions. By the time I finished, Carol looked furious. That little witch actually put you on the service entrance list? Carol. No, absolutely not. Evelyn, this is insane. I handed her one of the documents quietly. She scanned it. Then I looked up sharply. You still own Belrose outright? Yes. And Daniel doesn't know? I don't think he remembers. Carol stared at me like she couldn't decide whether to cry or scream. Oh my God. I sat down slowly. You know what hurts most? What? It's not Vanessa. Carol stayed silent. It's watching my son slowly become someone who thinks love should be ranked by social value. Tears filled her eyes immediately. That boy adored you. He used to. No, she said firmly. People don't stop loving their mothers that easily. They just get lost. Lost, maybe. Or maybe adulthood reveals who people truly are when status enters the room. Carol sat beside me. Are you going to tell him before the wedding? I looked toward the rain outside. No. Why not? Because if I expose the truth now, everyone will think this is about humiliation and revenge. And it isn't? I thought carefully before answering. No. It's about whether my son remembers who he is without being forced. Silence settled between us. Then Terrell asked quietly, and if he doesn't? That question lingered heavily in the room, because deep down, I already feared the answer. At noon, a black town car arrived to transport the immediate family to Belrose Estate. Immediate family. Interesting phrase considering I wasn't allowed through the front entrance. The driver stepped out politely. Mrs. Whitmore? Yes. He checked his clipboard. I've been instructed to take you to service access B. Even now, I felt something inside me crack quietly. Not dramatically, not loudly. Just enough to understand things would never fully return to what they were before today. That won't be necessary, I replied gently. The driver blinked. I'm sorry? I'll drive myself. He looked confused but nodded politely before leaving. Carol turned toward me immediately. You're really going? Yes. After all this? I picked up my purse slowly. Yes. Why? Because mothers keep showing up long after dignity tells them not to. Because love makes fools of women long past the age they should know better. Because somewhere inside Belrose Estate, my little boy still existed beneath all the ambition and weakness and fear. And part of me still hoped he might remember me before the day ended, even if hope itself was becoming humiliating. An hour later, I drove through the long, winding road toward Belrose Estate. The rain had stopped. The mansion stood glowing beneath pale afternoon light. White stone walls, massive iron gates, perfect gardens, beautiful. Still beautiful after all these years. As I approached the front drive, security guards stepped forward immediately. One raised his hand politely. Ma'am, guest access is through the east entrance today, unless your name is cleared for front arrival. I lowered the car window slowly. The young guard checked his tablet, then frowned slightly. I'm sorry, you've been assigned to Service Entry B. Service Entry B. Again. And suddenly, for the first time all day, I felt anger. Not explosive anger, the quiet kind, the dangerous kind, the kind that arrives when humiliation finally outweighs heartbreak. I looked past the guard toward the mansion Richard once called our forever home, then back at the young man simply following orders. "It's all right," I said softly, and I drove toward the kitchen entrance of my own mansion. The service entrance sat behind the east wing of Belrose Estate, hidden from the gardens, hidden from the fountains, hidden from the arriving guests stepping out of luxury cars beneath the grand front staircase. I parked beside catering vans and floral delivery trucks. For a moment, I simply sat there with both hands resting on the steering wheel. 83 weddings had taken place at Belrose since Richard and I restored it. Politicians, athletes, old Chicago families, even one famous actor whose guests drank 70-year-old champagne like water. And now, I was entering my own property through the kitchen loading entrance because my son's fiance thought I lowered the aesthetic. A catering employee hurried past my car, balancing trays of champagne flutes. "Careful," another worker whispered. "The bride's mother is freaking out about timing again." I almost smiled. Some things money can't buy: grace, warmth, or emotional security. Inside the service corridor, staff moved quickly through polished hallways, carrying flowers, linens, and silver trays. The smell of butter, coffee, and expensive perfume mixed strangely together. Nobody recognized me immediately, not as an owner, just another older woman trying not to be in the way. Interesting how invisible age becomes once wealth enters the room. A young event coordinator approached, holding a headset and clipboard. "You're Daniel Whitmore's mother?" "Yes." She looked relieved. "Perfect. We need family staging near the secondary bridal corridor in 15 minutes. Secondary bridal corridor. Everything today sounded like military operations. She handed me a cream-colored wristband. "Please wear this so security knows you belong in restricted family zones." Belong. The irony nearly made me laugh aloud. I slipped the wristband on quietly. Bright gold lettering read, "Family Access B." Not the main family, not VIP, not immediate family. Access B. Even humiliation had hierarchy. The coordinator checked her clipboard again. "You'll remain near the side ballroom entrance until photography begins." Of course. "And please avoid the front staircase until the Whitmore and Kensington family portraits are completed." The Whitmores and Kensingtons. Not Daniel and Vanessa. Not the bride and groom. Families as brands, transactions, mergers, status negotiations disguised as love stories. The coordinator rushed away before I could respond. I continued slowly through the hallway toward the ballroom, and the moment I stepped inside, my breath caught. Belrose looked beautiful. Thousands of candles reflected against crystal chandeliers. White roses cascaded from gold arches. The dance floor glowed beneath soft amber lighting. Richard would have hated half of it. Too formal, too cold, too performative. He always believed weddings should feel warm enough for people to cry comfortably. This one looked like a luxury magazine photo shoot. Near the ballroom entrance, I spotted Daniel. Black tuxedo, nervous smile, straightening his cuff repeatedly. My son looked handsome, but I'm not happy. There's a difference. When he noticed me, relief crossed his face instantly. "Mom." For a second, real warmth returned. He stepped toward me quickly. "You made it." Of course I made it. Mothers almost always do, even when they shouldn't. "You look tired," I said gently. He exhaled sharply. "That obvious?" "Yes." He glanced around nervously before lowering his voice. "Vanessa's father invited 2 additional investment groups this morning, and now seating's a disaster." Investment groups. At a wedding. Again. I touched his sleeve softly. "Daniel." He looked at me. "Do you actually want this life?" The question landed harder than I expected. His face shifted immediately, defensive, confused, cornered. What does that mean? It means you haven't smiled with your eyes once since yesterday. Silence. For one fragile second, it looked like he might tell me the truth. Then Vanessa's wedding planner rushed toward us. "There you are," she said breathlessly. "Daniel, we need you upstairs immediately. Vanessa's mother wants final approval on ceremony placement." Daniel closed his eyes briefly, not dramatic, just exhausted. Then he looked back at me. "I'll find you after the ceremony, okay?" I nodded softly, but deep down, I already knew he wouldn't. People trapped inside performance rarely notice who gets abandoned backstage. As Daniel disappeared upstairs, someone beside me spoke quietly. "He looks overwhelmed." I turned. An older woman stood near the floral arrangements, adjusting white orchids. Simple black uniform, gray hair pinned neatly, kind eyes. Maria, Belle Rose's head housekeeper. She'd worked for us for 26 years. The second she fully recognized me, her eyes widened. "Mrs. Whitmore." I smiled gently. "Hello, Maria." Emotion filled her face instantly. "Oh my goodness." Before she could continue, I squeezed her hand softly. "Not yet." She understood immediately. Like Walter. The truly loyal people always understood quickly. Maria looked around carefully before whispering. "The staff's been talking all morning about how they're treating you." I sighed quietly. "I didn't come here for conflict." "No," she said sadly. "You came because you love your son." That nearly broke me, because somehow a woman polishing silverware understood me better than my own child. Maria glanced toward the staircase. "They don't know, do they?" "No. And you're really going to let this continue?" I thought carefully before answering. I needed to see how far it would go. Maria's expression darkened slightly. "I think you already have." Before I could answer, loud voices echoed from the upper hallway. Vanessa and her mother. Absolutely cannot have random older guests wandering near the investor tables. Random older guests. Interesting. Vanessa descended the staircase moments later wearing a silk robe while makeup artists rushed around her. Beautiful, perfect, tense. Her eyes landed on me instantly, and immediately her posture changed. Controlled politeness. The kind people use when speaking to someone socially beneath them. "Evelyn," she said with a tight smile. "Good, you're here." Not, "You look beautiful." Not, "Thank you for coming." Just, "Good, you're here." Like checking off inventory. "You'll stay near the west seating area during guest arrival," she continued. "We're keeping the immediate family concentrated near the front reception line." Immediate family. Again. I nodded quietly. Whatever makes the day easier. Relief crossed her face instantly. That was the moment I realized something important. Vanessa wasn't afraid of confrontation. She was afraid of exposure. Afraid I might disrupt the image she spent months constructing. Then her mother approached. Elaine Kensington. Tall, elegant, diamond earrings sharp enough to cut glass. She looked at me over slowly, not cruelly, worse, dismissively. "Evelyn," she said, "I trust transportation through the service drive was arranged properly." There it was, open humiliation, wrapped in etiquette. "Yes," I answered calmly. "Everything was very organized." "Wonderful. We've tried to maintain a certain standard today." Standard. I looked directly into her eyes then. And how fortunate Belle Rose Estate could accommodate that standard. Something flickered across her expression. Small, fast, suspicion maybe. But it vanished immediately. "Oh, yes," she smiled proudly. The estate owners have been incredibly cooperative throughout negotiations. Interesting. I almost asked, which negotiations exactly? Instead, I simply smiled softly. I'm sure they have. Elaine nodded once before turning away toward the ballroom. Vanessa lingered a moment longer, then quietly. Thank you for not making things difficult. That sentence again. Not making things difficult. As though asking for dignity would ruin the floral arrangements. I watched her walk away slowly, and suddenly something inside me settled completely. Not anger, not revenge, certainty. Because for the first time all day, I no longer felt embarrassed. They should have been embarrassed. A woman had spent years loving my son, supporting him, protecting him, helping build the very life he now used to exclude her. And he had become so desperate to belong to wealthy people. He forgot who quietly gave him everything first. From somewhere upstairs, ceremony music began softly. Guests started taking their seats. The wedding was about to begin, and none of them, not Vanessa, not her parents, not even Daniel, had any idea the woman they pushed through the kitchen entrance held the deed to every chandelier glowing above their heads. The ceremony began at 4 o'clock sharp. Soft violin music floated through the ballroom. Candles flickered against marble columns. Guests whispered behind champagne glasses and designer suits. Everything looked perfect. That was the problem. Perfect events usually hide ugly truths underneath. I remained near the west seating area, exactly where Vanessa instructed. Second row, far edge, half hidden behind a floral arrangement large enough to block half my view of the altar. Interesting placement for the groom's mother. People around me barely acknowledged my existence. Meanwhile, Vanessa's family occupied the front rows like royalty attending a coronation. Her father moved confidently through the room, shaking hands with investors and donors. Her mother adjusted seating placements personally. Wedding photographers hovered around them constantly. Image, status, presentation. Every detail is carefully managed. Then the music changed, and everyone stood. Vanessa appeared at the top of the staircase in a fitted white gown that probably cost more than my first car. Beautiful. Cold. The ballroom collectively inhaled. Even I couldn't deny she looked stunning. Daniel stood beneath the floral arch waiting for her. And suddenly, my chest tightened painfully, because despite everything, he was still my little boy. Still the child who once brought me dandelions because he thought they looked expensive. Still the teenager who slept beside my hospital bed after my surgery because he feared losing his last parent, too. Love doesn't disappear simply because respect does. That's what makes betrayal so painful. The officiant began speaking. Marriage, commitment, family legacy. Legacy. Interesting word inside Belrose estate. As the vows started, I noticed Walter standing near the back entrance, speaking urgently into an earpiece. Something was wrong. A moment later, Maria appeared beside him, looking tense. Their eyes found mine briefly, then quickly shifted away. Don't panic. Concern. Quiet professional concern. I felt it immediately. The atmosphere had changed, like pressure building before a storm. Meanwhile, Vanessa continued her vows flawlessly. Every sentence was rehearsed. Every emotion is carefully measured. I promise to build a future worthy of the life we deserve together. Deserve. That word again. Then Daniel began his vows. At first, his voice sounded steady, but halfway through, he stopped. It just stopped completely. Silence spread through the ballroom. Vanessa blinked at him softly. Daniel? He stared out toward the audience. Not at Vanessa, at me. And for the first time all day, he looked terrified. Not nervous, terrified. The officiant smiled awkwardly. Take your time. Daniel swallowed hard. Then suddenly Walter entered the ballroom, fully, alongside two men in dark suits carrying leather document cases. Legal department. I recognized them immediately. Belrose Estate corporate attorneys. Oh no, my stomach dropped. I never called them. Walter met my eyes again, apologetic. Something had happened beyond my control. Guests began murmuring softly. Vanessa's father turned sharply toward the back of the ballroom. Confusion spread across his face. One of the attorneys approached him directly and spoke quietly. I watched the exact second blood drained from his face. Interesting. Very interesting. Vanessa noticed immediately. Dad? Her father ignored her completely. The attorney handed him several documents, then another set, then pointed discreetly toward me. Toward me. The ballroom energy shifted instantly. People sensed it. Wealthy rooms always detect power changes quickly. Vanessa turned slowly toward my section. Her expression changed from confusion to disbelief to horror. Daniel looked like he might physically collapse. What is this? Vanessa whispered sharply. Her father finally spoke, but not quietly enough. The estate ownership transfer negotiations were fraudulent. Silence exploded through the ballroom. Not loud silence, the dangerous kind. The kind where hundreds of people suddenly stop breathing at once. Vanessa stared at him. What are you talking about? Her father looked stunned. They told us Belrose was controlled by a holding company looking to sell controlling interest. One of the attorneys corrected him calmly. Belrose Estate is wholly owned by Evelyn Whitmore through Whitmore Restoration Holdings. Every head in the ballroom turned toward me. Every single one. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The violinists had stopped playing entirely. I sat frozen in the second row while realization spread across the room like fire. Vanessa's mother looked physically ill. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, like a man finally understanding the full weight of his own choices. The attorney continued professionally. Our office became aware this morning that unauthorized representations regarding estate acquisition were being made to financial parties during today's event. Vanessa's father looked furious now. I was told the current owner was elderly, detached from operations, and eager to liquidate. Detached from operations. Interesting. The attorney glanced toward me respectfully. Mrs. Whitmore remains sole owner and active executive authority. Active executive authority. The ballroom murmured louder now. Whispers everywhere. Oh my God, that's his mother? They made her use the service entrance. Wait, she owns Belrose? I wanted the floor to open beneath me. Not because I felt ashamed, because public humiliation destroys everyone involved, even those who technically win. Vanessa looked at Daniel slowly. You knew. His silence answered first. Then quietly, no. That somehow made it worse, because now everyone understood this wasn't manipulation. It was abandonment. Real abandonment. Vanessa's mother approached the attorneys quickly. This is completely inappropriate timing. One attorney answered calmly. The inappropriate timing was using false ownership claims to secure investor relationships during a wedding. Sharp, controlled, professional. The kind of sentence lawyers practice carefully. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Several investors looked furious now. One older man near the front muttered, You told us your family was finalizing the Belrose acquisition. Vanessa's father looked trapped. I believed negotiations were progressing. They never existed, the attorney replied. More whispers, more stares, and through all of it, Daniel never stopped looking at me. Not the attorneys, not Vanessa, not the guests. Me, his mother. The woman he made entered through the kitchen of her own mansion. Finally, he stepped down from the altar, slowly, like every movement hurts. The ballroom watched in complete silence. When he reached my row, his voice cracked. Mom. I looked up at him quietly, and suddenly, he looked 6 years old again, lost, ashamed, heartbroken. Not because he lost status, because he finally saw what he had done. I didn't know, he whispered. I know. Tears filled his eyes instantly. Real tears, not performance, not embarrassment. Grief. The grief people feel when they realize they betrayed someone who loved them completely. Behind him, Vanessa stood frozen at the altar, while photographers awkwardly lowered their cameras. The perfect wedding had cracked open, and underneath all the flowers and chandeliers and status games, the truth finally stood exposed in front of everyone. Nobody knew what to do after that. The officiant stood frozen beside the altar, holding unfinished vows. The musicians sat silently, gripping their instruments. Wedding staff avoided eye contact, while guests whispered behind raised champagne glasses. One moment it had been a luxury wedding. The next, it felt like a public unmasking. Daniel remained standing in front of me, pale and shaken. Mom, please say something. His voice barely sounded like him anymore. Not polished, not corporate, not rehearsed, just wounded. I looked up at my son carefully, and suddenly I saw every version of him at once. The little boy running through Belrose Gardens with muddy shoes, the teenager crying after Richard's funeral. The young man was desperate to prove he belonged among wealthy people who always made him feel temporary. And now, this version. A grown man realizing too late that status had slowly turned him against the one person who never asked him to earn love. There's nothing to say right now, I answered softly. That somehow hurt him more than anger would have. Behind him, Vanessa finally descended from the altar steps, graceful, controlled, humiliated. But underneath all of it, furious, not heartbroken, furious. Because image conscious people rarely fear emotional loss as much as public embarrassment. She stopped several feet away from us. You knew this entire time? She asked me quietly. Interesting. Not, why didn't you tell us? But you knew. Yes. And you let this happen? I almost laughed at the irony, because suddenly the burden of shame had shifted onto me, as though I forced them to mistreat me. Daniel turned sharply toward her. Vanessa. No, she snapped softly. I want an answer. I looked directly at her. You never asked who built Belrose. Silence. Her expression hardened instantly. That's not fair. No? You could have told us. I could have. My voice stayed calm. Quiet. The calmness made people more uncomfortable than yelling ever could. But I thought how people treat someone without status tells you more than how they treat someone with power. Several nearby guests lowered their eyes immediately, because truth embarrasses witnesses too. Vanessa folded her arms tightly. We never mistreated you. Ah, denial, the final refuge of elegant cruelty. You assigned me to the kitchen entrance. That was logistics. You seated me outside during the rehearsal dinner. We had limited placement. You introduced me to staff as secondary family access. That's not what I meant. I nodded slowly. Intentions matter less than patterns. Daniel closed his eyes, because deep down, he knew every word was true. Across the ballroom, Vanessa's father argued quietly with the attorneys, while investors began leaving in clusters. The wedding atmosphere had collapsed completely now. No music, no laughter, only whispers. And through all of it, Belrose itself stood silent around us, almost watching. I suddenly remembered the first winter Richard and I spent restoring the mansion. No central heating, broken pipes. Half the rooms are unusable. We used blankets and portable heaters while sanding wood floors ourselves because contractors were too expensive. At night, Richard used to walk through the dark ballroom holding blueprints and whispering, "One day, people will celebrate love here. Love, not ego, not hierarchy, not social climbing. Love." Somehow that vision had gotten lost beneath luxury. Maria approached quietly beside me. "Mrs. Wetmore," she whispered gently, "would you like tea brought to the west sitting room? Not the ballroom, not the reception floor, the west sitting room. Private, quiet, protected." I looked at her gratefully. "Yes, thank you." Vanessa noticed immediately. The way staff instinctively deferred to me. The respect, the familiarity, the quiet authority. And I watched realization settle deeper into her expression. Not just that I owned Belrose, but the people inside it loved me. That mattered more. Daniel stepped closer. "Mom, I swear to you, I didn't know." "I believe you." "Then why does it feel like you're looking at me differently?" Because I was. Not with hatred, with clarity. "There comes a moment," I said softly, "when parents realize their children have become strangers." The sentence hit him like a physical blow. "No, you were ashamed of me." "I was never ashamed of you." "Then why hide me?" Silence. Real silence this time. Not performative silence. The kind that forces honesty into the room. Daniel rubbed both hands over his face slowly, and finally, the truth came out. "I didn't think you fit into this world." There it was. Not cruelty. Fear. Fear that his ordinary widowed mother would embarrass him among wealthy people. Fear that simplicity would expose how desperately he wanted approval. Tears filled his eyes immediately after saying it. Because sometimes people don't fully hear themselves until the truth finally escapes aloud. "I hate that I said that," he whispered. "But it's true." My chest tightened painfully. Not because he admitted it, because somewhere along the way, my son learned that love had social rankings, and I still didn't know exactly when that happened. Vanessa looked shaken now, too. Not guilty exactly, but destabilized, because power dynamics had shifted violently. She suddenly wasn't marrying upward into untouchable old money prestige. She was standing inside a mansion owned by the woman she reduced to kitchen access, and everyone knew it. One of the investors walked past, muttering quietly to another guest, "If that's how they treat family in public, imagine private business dealings." That sentence landed hard. Vanessa's father heard it too. His face darkened instantly. Because reputation among wealthy circles is everything, and reputations collapse much faster than they're built. The officiant approached awkwardly. "I Perhaps we should pause the ceremony briefly while everyone regroups." Regroups. As though this was a delayed catering issue. Vanessa turned toward Daniel sharply. "We need to continue." Daniel stared at her. For the first time all day, I really stared at her. Not obediently, not automatically, carefully. And suddenly, something changed in his face, like fog clearing. "You still care about the wedding right now?" he asked quietly. Her expression flickered. What's that supposed to mean? My mother was humiliated. Vanessa folded her arms tighter. "We didn't know she owned Belrose." Daniel's jaw tightened instantly, and there it was. The sentence that changed everything. Not, "we hurt her," not, "we treated her badly," only, "we didn't know she had power." I watched realization hit my son in real time. Slow, brutal, permanent. He stepped backward from her slightly. "You really don't hear yourself, do you?" "Daniel." If she were just some ordinary widow, his voice cracked, you would still think this was acceptable. Vanessa looked stunned, then angry, then defensive. You're twisting this. No, he whispered. I think for the first time in years, I'm finally seeing it clearly. Silence spread again, heavy, painful, the kind that changes relationships permanently. And standing there beneath the chandeliers, Richard once restored by hand, my son finally understood something devastating. The woman he tried to hide at his wedding had been the strongest person in the room the entire time. The wedding never recovered after that. Technically, the ceremony continued. The officiant finished the vows. Daniel placed the ring on Vanessa's finger. Guests applauded politely, but the warmth was gone. Everyone felt it. The ballroom no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like people watching a beautiful glass sculpture crack slowly from the inside. I remained seated quietly for the rest of the ceremony. Not because I wanted revenge, because leaving would have turned the moment into a spectacle. And despite everything, I still loved my son too much to publicly destroy him. When the ceremony ended, guests drifted awkwardly toward cocktail hour, pretending nothing unusual had happened. That's what wealthy people do best: pretend. Pretend humiliation didn't happen. Pretend relationships aren't collapsing. Pretend appearances matter more than emotional truth. But whispers followed everywhere. I could hear them passing behind champagne glasses. She owns the estate. They made her use the service entrance. How didn't the groom know? Poor woman. Poor woman. Interesting. Because strangely enough, I no longer felt weak, only tired. Maria guided me quietly into the west sitting room away from the ballroom noise. A fire crackled softly inside the stone fireplace. Rain had started again outside. The room smelled faintly like cedar wood and old books. Richard's favorite room. I used to find him here late at night, reviewing renovation plans with reading glasses sliding down his nose. For a moment, the memory nearly broke me. Maria placed tea beside me gently. You handled yourself beautifully, Mrs. Whitmore. I smiled faintly. I don't feel beautiful right now. No, she said softly. You look heartbroken. That was closer to the truth. After Maria left, I sat alone, listening to distant music from the ballroom downstairs. The reception had started, or at least they were trying to pretend it had. About 20 minutes later, someone knocked softly at the door. Daniel. The second he stepped inside, I saw it. His entire world had shifted. Not because of the mansion, because Shang finally stripped away illusion. His bow tie hung loose now. His eyes were red. His shoulders looked heavy, older somehow. Can I come in? You never have to ask me that. That almost made him cry again. He sat across from me quietly. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then finally, I don't know how I became this person. The honesty in his voice hurt more than excuses would have. I stared into the fireplace carefully before answering. It happened slowly. He swallowed hard. I kept telling myself none of the small things mattered. The rehearsal dinner seating, the kitchen entrance, the family photos, the second row. Tiny humiliations. Individually defensible, collectively devastating. I should have protected you. The sentence cracked apart halfway through. And suddenly, my little boy was sitting in front of me again. Not the polished executive, not the socially ambitious groom, just my son, ashamed. I think, he whispered painfully, I wanted their approval so badly that I convinced myself you would always forgive me anyway. There it was, the real truth. Children sometimes mistreat the safest person in their life because they believe that love is permanent no matter what they do. And mothers too often prove them right. I looked at him carefully. Do you love Vanessa? The question stunned him.
He blinked several times. I thought I did. Thought, not I do. Past tense. Interesting. What changed? He laughed bitterly under his breath. Today, silence settled heavily again. Rain tapped against the tall windows. Finally, he spoke again. When she said none of this would have mattered if you were just an ordinary widow. His jaw tightened painfully. I realized she never understood you as a person. No, she understood me perfectly. That was the problem. People obsessed with status recognize kindness immediately because they mistake it for weakness. What are you going to do now? I asked quietly. Daniel looked toward the rain outside. I honestly don't know. And for the first time in years, his answer sounded truthful. No performance, no image management, no polished certainty, just uncertainty, human uncertainty. A soft knock interrupted us. Walter stepped carefully inside. Mrs. Whitmore, I apologize for disturbing you. What is it? He hesitated slightly. Several guests are preparing to leave early due to the situation involving the investors. Of course they were. Money circles evaporate quickly once power shifts. And Walter looked uncomfortable. Vanessa's father is blaming Daniel for not informing them about the estate ownership. Daniel laughed once, a hollow, exhausted sound. He never asked. Walter nodded carefully. There's also concern among the guests that the Kensington family misrepresented business relationships. Daniel rubbed both hands over his face slowly. Everything was collapsing now. Not just the wedding, the illusion, the social performance, the carefully constructed image Vanessa's family built around themselves. And suddenly, I felt deeply sad for everyone involved, because beneath arrogance usually sits insecurity. People obsessed with status rarely feel worthy without it. Walter left quietly after updating us. The moment the door closed again, Daniel spoke softly. Do you know the worst part? What? You still came. That sentence pierced deeper than anything else that day. You knew how they were treating you. His voice trembled now. You knew they were humiliating you. I smiled sadly. You were getting married, and that mattered more than your dignity? Ah, there it was. The question mothers spend entire lifetimes avoiding. I thought carefully before answering. No. Then why come? Because love is complicated. Because motherhood rewires pride. Because grief makes women tolerate things they should never tolerate. Because I still remembered the little boy who once slept beside my hospital bed, afraid I might die too. I came because I hoped somewhere inside all this, I gestured softly toward the ballroom downstairs, you would remember yourself. Tears rolled down his face immediately. Not loud crying, the silent kind grown men do when guilt finally becomes unbearable. I'm sorry, Mom. I closed my eyes briefly. There are apologies that heal, and apologies that arrive too late to restore innocence. This one belonged somewhere in between. Downstairs, the music stopped suddenly. Raised voices echoed faintly through the hallway. Vanessa, then her father, then several guests left quickly. Daniel stood immediately. I should go deal with this. But before he reached the door, I asked quietly, Daniel? He turned. When was the last time you were truly happy? The question stopped him cold, because exhausted people rarely ask themselves that honestly. He stood there thinking for a long time. Then finally, I don't remember. That answer told me everything. After he left, I remained alone beside the fireplace while rain fell harder outside Belrose Estate. The mansion felt strangely quiet now, like it was exhaling after years of holding tension inside its walls. And somewhere deep inside myself, I realized something painful too. This was never really about ownership. Not the mansion, not the wedding, not the money. It was about what happens when people become so desperate to belong somewhere, they start abandoning the people who loved them before success arrived. 3 months after the wedding, Belrose estate felt peaceful again. The flowers from the ceremony were gone. The rented chandeliers had been removed. The gossip surrounding the Whitmore Kensington disaster slowly faded from Chicago's social circles. Wealthy people move on quickly once scandal loses entertainment value.
But some wounds linger quietly long after the whispers disappear, especially family wounds. I spent most mornings walking the Belrose Gardens alone. Autumn has arrived fully now. Gold leaves covered the stone pathways Richard once repaired by hand. The lake behind the estate moved softly beneath gray skies. For the first time in years, the mansion felt like home again. Not performance, not status, not a venue for approval. Home. After the wedding, the reception collapsed within hours. Half the investors left before dinner. Vanessa's parents spent weeks dealing with professional fallout from the false acquisition claims. Several business relationships quietly disappeared. And Daniel never moved into the future he thought he wanted. The marriage lasted exactly 19 days. Not because of the humiliation, because humiliation exposed truths that already existed. According to Daniel, the arguments began the moment they returned from their canceled honeymoon suite upstairs of Belrose. Not about ownership, about values, about image, about class, about respect, about what kind of people they had both slowly become. One evening, about 6 weeks after the wedding, Daniel came to visit me unexpectedly. No assistant, no luxury car, no expensive watch, just my son. He stood outside the front door for a long time before knocking. The front door. Interesting, isn't it? The same man who asked me to enter through the kitchen now looked afraid to approach the main entrance himself. When I opened the door, he looked exhausted, older, like grief had finally caught up with him. I wasn't sure you'd answer. You're still my son. His eyes filled immediately. That sentence nearly destroyed him. Because unconditional love feels beautiful until you realize how badly you abused it. I invited him inside. For a while, we sat in silence beside the fireplace, while rain tapped softly against the windows again, just like the wedding night. Only now, there were no guests, no chandeliers, no performance, just the truth. Finally, he spoke. I filed for divorce yesterday. I nodded slowly. No celebration, no satisfaction, only sadness. Because failed marriages are still funerals in their own way. She said I embarrassed her forever, he continued quietly. And what did you say? He stared into the fire. I told her the worst embarrassment of my life was realizing my mother arrived at my wedding through a service entrance because I was too weak to stop it. Silence settled heavily between us. Then he whispered something I never expected. I think Dad would have been ashamed of me. That one hurt because Richard loved Daniel completely. But love does not erase truth. I answered carefully. No. Daniel looked up. Your father would have been heartbroken for you. That difference mattered. Shame destroys people. Heartbreak invites them back toward themselves. Daniel rubbed his eyes slowly. I spent years trying to become accepted by people who were never fully going to respect me anyway. There it was, the real tragedy beneath everything. Not greed, not the mansion, not the wedding. Insecurity. People who don't feel worthy will sacrifice almost anything for approval, even family. I forgot where I came from, he admitted. No, I said softly. You forgot who loved you before success became part of your identity. Tears rolled down his face quietly. and suddenly I saw Richard in him again. Not in appearance, in vulnerability. Richard always cried silently too. Daniel looked around the room slowly. This house used to feel warm. It still can. He swallowed hard. I don't deserve that. Maybe not, but healing rarely begins with deserving. It begins with honesty. Over the following weeks, Daniel started visiting more often. Not for money, not for business, not for appearances, for peace. Sometimes we cooked dinner together, quietly. Sometimes we walked the gardens. Sometimes we simply sat in silence, remembering Richard. The healing was slow. Real healing usually is. One afternoon, while we repaired old flower beds near the west garden wall, Daniel suddenly asked, "Why didn't you expose everything the moment they humiliated you?" I paused carefully before answering, because I needed to know whether kindness still existed in my son, without power forcing it out of him. He lowered his eyes immediately. "And did it?" I studied him quietly. The man kneeling in wet soil beside me no longer looked like the groom obsessed with appearances. He looked human again, flawed, ashamed, trying. "Yes," I answered softly, "but barely in time." That answer stayed with him. I could see it. Months later, Belrose hosted another wedding. Smaller, simpler, warm. The bride cried during the vows. The groom's grandmother danced barefoot near the fountain. Children ran through the gardens laughing. Richard would have loved it. That evening, after the guests left, Daniel stood beside me, overlooking the ballroom from the upper staircase. "You know," he said quietly, "I spent years thinking wealth meant finally becoming important." I glanced at him. "And now?" He looked downstairs where staff members laughed together while clearing tables. Now he understood what Richard understood all along, that being loved honestly is rarer than being admired. The sentence hung softly between us. Outside, snow had begun falling lightly across the estate grounds. Belrose looked peaceful beneath the winter lights. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel asked the question I think he'd been carrying since the wedding. "Do you forgive me?" I looked at my son carefully. Forgiveness is complicated. People think forgiveness arrives as a single emotional moment. It doesn't. Real forgiveness comes quietly, in layers, in choices, in small returns toward trust. Finally, I answered truthfully, "I'm trying to." His eyes filled again, but this time, not from shame, from gratitude. And as we stood together inside the mansion, he almost lost himself trying to impress others within. I realized something important. The most dangerous thing about humiliation is not the pain it causes. It's how easily people begin believing they must earn the right to be treated with dignity. But real love, real family, should never require someone to enter through the kitchen just to feel welcome. If someone treated your mother this way at a wedding, would you have stayed silent or walked out immediately? And be honest, do you think Daniel deserved a second chance after what he allowed to happen to Evelyn? I read every comment. Tell me where you're watching from tonight, and if you've ever experienced a moment where someone made you feel unwelcome in your own family.